the professor says, put away those phones, do not be looking at your computers. But I'm going to tell you the opposite. Take out your phones if you got one with you, because I want to find out a little bit about you, okay? So what you do is you text the word eco-right, because that's what we are. We're the eco-right. It's a balance to the environmental left. There's an environmental left in this country. It's enormous, has hundreds of millions of dollars spent on a year. We got a teeny right wing called the eco-right, E-C-O-R-I-G-H-T. So if you text the word eco-right to 22333, you'll be joined to this survey, and then we're going to find out a little bit about you. And so on the first one here, Maddie, can you hit that thing that says full screen, I think? Yeah, okay, now it should be activated, I hope. Or hit activate also will do it. There you go. Are you all getting through? If you're through, then what you can do is, where are you on the political spectrum? This is a word cloud, so be yourself. You can describe yourself as a conservative, yes. Or a liberal, that's okay. You can describe yourself as a Republican, yes. Or a Democrat or a Libertarian or whatever you want to describe yourself as. Ooh, look, somebody just did it for me. Thank you. And so whatever you can be an anarchist, you can be a communist, you can be a socialist, you can be whatever you want to be. This is a word cloud, be what you want. And we're going to build that word cloud and figure out what we've got most of. So come on, a few Republicans, would you please? Yes, you put the word in there, right? So you have to type eco-right to 22333, and then you'll start, just put in a word that describes you. We got a moderate, we got a green and a free, and we got a underinformed. Now that is an interesting kind of person, the underinformed. Interesting. Okay, so Democrat and liberal are pretty large here. Independent's fairly large. Conservative is hanging a little bit. Progressive equal to conservative. So all right. So everybody that voted that wants to vote, or tell us about yourself. So now I'm going to do something very rude, and Matt, if you give me the next one, I'm going to force you into one or two parties. If you had to be forced, it's no longer that freedom of the word cloud. You're either A, a Republican, or B, a Democrat. Oh, come on. Okay. There we go. Okay, so come on, A's. A. Everybody type an A. Okay, so it is rude of me to force you into that choice, isn't it? But it helps us report to people who want to know who we're speaking to. Okay, so we got 18% Republicans and 83% Democrats. Okay, so great. So anybody, you got an A or a B up there? So the next one, obviously we just lost a little bit. Because I was wondering, how were we, the math wasn't working out there. Did anybody notice that math problem? So, okay, that looks like a better result. I got to tell you a funny one. You know, I had this debate one time in Washington about the idea, Reason Magazine, it was a libertarian magazine, sponsored it, and it was supposed to be a conversation among friends, how to solve climate change. And so for my benefit, just beforehand, apparently this Competitive Enterprise Institute had printed up buttons and left them in every seat. And let me see if I can get this right, what they had. They had 70, 29. 70 and 29. And what they were after was, in a minute you'll hear about me losing in a Republican runoff primary. by 71 to 29. The problem with their button at 70-29, in a two-person race, how do you end at 70-29? So apparently, they're mathematically challenged as well as scientifically challenged. So anyway, we almost had that problem up here for a while. Okay, we got 19% finally. Okay, Maddie, give me the next one. Okay, so now, are you persuaded, you're persuaded by the evidence that yes, we're causing climate change and yes, we can solve it, or B, we're causing climate change, but no, we can't solve it, or C, no, we're not causing it, so nothing we can do or should do. So, so A, B, or C? And really, you are most welcome if you're B or C here, because particularly if you're the subset of those 18% of Republicans and either B or C, I want to talk with you. You're the ones I've come to speak to. If you're A and one of those 80, however many percent we had of Democrats, love you, but you're wonderful. You're sweet. But I need a lot of Republicans, and I need a lot of people that I can talk to about in either the B or the C position. Okay, so that's so we've got most people convinced here, and so I should stop talking. So thank you very much. Enjoyed it. The food was great. Particularly Maddie, the food was the best. I told Maddie earlier, the food was the best I've really ever had an event like this. So pretty impressive. And it's compostable stuff, which is really great. A lot of times you go to a sustainability event and they give you the cookies in a package, everything's in a package, got some styrofoam in there, and you figure out, wait a minute, this is a sustainability gathering. Okay, so, I'm going to keep on going, even though I'm speaking to some folks that are already convinced, and I might unconvince you. Let me figure, Maddie, can you give me back my PowerPoint? So, enough said about you, let's talk about me some. Actually, I once said that to a girl on a date. Thankfully, she knew I was joking, because she's been my wife of 37 years now. But so enough said about you. Let's talk about me some. How to make this thing go? Probably you all understand about this, that the scientists are in agreement based on the fact that there are very few in the B and the C category. You're aware that there's amazing consensus in the scientific community, and there are a number of studies referenced there. And this is who we're after. We're after people who are conservative and concerned about climate change. That simple ad turned out to be our most effective Facebook ad so far. You're just not alone. It gave people the opportunity to feel like, hey, I'm not so odd. I'm conservative and I'm concerned about climate change. The reason that conservatives aren't so interested in talking about climate change is probably some of these things. What they've heard is it's going to take a bigger government to solve it. We need to repent and do with less. Fixing it will destroy the American economy. China and India are going to go right on. There's nothing we can do about it, and caring about climate change makes you a liberal. So if that's what you've heard and you're one of those people that was a conservative and either in B or C, I'm here to reassure you, because you're getting ready to hear the opposite of all of those statements. So it's not going to take a bigger government. If we do this right, and the way my CCL friends want to do it, for example, it's going to be a smaller government. We don't need to repent and do as less. You saw my first slide, we're energy optimists. We're going to talk about more energy, more mobility, and more freedom. We're not going to repent and do with less. And it's not going to destroy the American economy. If we play it right, this is an incredible opportunity. China and India are going to get in on this thing if we use our market power, and I'll describe that in a minute. And there's everything we can do about it. We better hope so. By the way, one of our underperforming Facebook ads was actually my favorite. Isn't that something? I came up with it. I thought it was a great ad, and it turned out to not be so popular on Facebook. It had, I searched images for sinners in the hands of an angry God. And I found this guy that looks like he's preaching. Looks like he's got a Bible in this hand. Looks like he's really giving it in this hand, right? And so, actually, it's a fuzzed up picture. What he really is a guy in a ornate city council chambers. And so he's... but the image really does look like sinners in the hands of an angry God. And so we put thunderclouds in the top and lightning coming down. And it's climate change. Lightning is the climate change. It's labeled climate change. And the tagline at the bottom is, we better hope it's human caused. So, get it? so apparently Facebook didn't like it, but I thought it was fun. So there's everything we can do about it. If it's not, we better hope it's human caused. If it's not, really, we are hosed. And caring about climate change does not make you a liberal. It actually makes you a rock-solid conservative. So now you're wondering, how in the world did this guy come to this? If he, in fact, represented a red district in a red state, how could he have come to this? So I'll tell you my story. That was the thing about, enough said about you in the poll everywhere. Let's talk about me some. So for my first 6 years in Congress, I said climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. But if you represented Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina as a Republican, that would have been enough for you too. And so that was my first 6 years. I admit that's pretty ignorant, okay? But that's the way it was. Then I was out of Congress for 6 years doing commercial real estate law again in Greenville, South Carolina. And running for Congress for the same seat again in 2004. So my son came to me. He just turned 18, so he's voting for the first time. He's the eldest of our 5 kids. And he said to me, Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment. It's the first of a 3-step metamorphosis for me. His 4 sisters agreed, his mother agreed, my wife. And so this new constituency is born. Very important constituency to respond to. These people can change the locks on the doors, you know, and so you want to stay close with those people. You don't want to get at odds with that constituency. And so, and by the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what, right? We were mortgaging the farmette that we live on to run for Congress again. You know what a farmette is, by the way? A farmette's when you're not making a living farming, you just pretend to be a farmer, you know. So we've got 14 chickens and 4 horses and a big garden, and we're green acres, you know, and so so Robert knew we're mortgaging the farm in order to run for Congress again. He's going to vote for me no matter what. What he's really saying was, Dad, I love you, and you can be better than you were before. So how about be relevant to my future and your daughter's futures, and let's do something. Let's make this Inglis 2.0, the new and improved version. And so. Second step for me was going to Antarctica with the science committee and seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. And with Mike Mann here and Admiral Titley, let me just tell you, this is going to sound strange to them because they're scientists, right? But there was something that happened on that trip that is probably will sound rather strange. There's a guy named Donald Manahan, who's a scientist at USC, the other one. We got the first one in South Carolina. That's the University of South Carolina. It was the first one. That other USC is the second. It was a much later start of their school. Anyway, so he had an aging and ailing mother at the time. And I had an aging and ailing mother. And he told me that he needed to call her, his mother. And it meant something to me. Isn't that strange? That actually helped me to see that this famous scientist was a human being who cared about his mother. And so it made me better able to hear his science. It's odd, right? But the reality is that we are human, and we learn from people who are like us and who like us. And if we don't think they like us and that they're not like us, it's hard for us to learn anything from them. And so Donald Manahan came for me this really important source of information. He's also a master teacher. And that means that he could go to any level you wanted to speak at. He'd hear a question from, say, Senator John McCain on that trip or Sherry Bollard on that trip, and he'd go to the postdoc level, in answering it. He'd hear my question, and he'd go without condescension to the GED level. And he'd answer there, and he would answer in all the range from postdoc to GED. Without condescension, as he came down to me. That's a master teacher. By the way, people who really know their stuff can do that. People who don't know their stuff too well stick in one bandwidth, and that's the only one they can talk to you in. And don't go out of that bandwidth, or they don't know what they're talking about. And so, but Donald was a credible source for me, and it meant a lot to me. And basically what I saw there was the ice core drillings and the record of the Earth's atmosphere trapped in the ice. Fun fact to know and tell, the South Pole is a desert. It gets 1/4 inch of precipitation a year. They describe their ski conditions, a little bit like the ski conditions here maybe, not quite, but because they've got more ice. They say their ski conditions are a mile of ice and a couple inches of powder. And so it's 10,000 feet above sea level at the South Pole, 5,000 feet of dirt, 5,000 feet of ice. In that ice is an incredible record of the Earth's atmosphere. And that's what I learned, is stability followed by this uptick coinciding with the Industrial Revolution. The second step in the metamorphosis there in Antarctica. Still not enough to move me, though. Third step was another science committee trip and something of a spiritual awakening. Impossible, right? How can you have a spiritual awakening on a godless science committee trip? Because all scientists are godless, right? And so apparently not, because this guy, Scott Heron, who is just publishing a paper, I just talked to Scott last night, Mike, and he said to say hello. Scott's become a very dear friend, but I didn't know him at all at the time, but I could tell before we had a chance to talk that he and I shared a worldview. Because as we were snorkeling together, he'd go down, he'd show me something, he'd come to the surface, and he'd be all excited. I could see in his face, I could hear in his voice, I'd see in his eyes, I knew that he was worshiping God in everything he was showing me. Because, St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words. And so Scott was preaching the gospel, and I could hear it. I knew we shared a worldview. And so later we had a chance to talk. And he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. Scott rides his bike to work. He hangs his kids and his wife's clothes on the line, tried to do without the electric dryer. He tries to do without electric air conditioning in Townsville, Australia, a pretty hot place. All in order to consciously love people coming after us. And some of my conservative friends would laugh at all those things, thinking, what a silly little fella, doing these things. But in Scott's case, it really is loving God and loving people. And so I got right inspired by that. I want to be like Scott, loving God and loving people. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. Note to self, do not introduce carbon tax in midst of Great Recession in reddest district of reddest state of nation, because it will not go well. And it did not go well at all. After 12 years in Congress in a Republican runoff, I got 29% of the vote, and the other guy got 71%. That totes to 100. And so it's not 70-29, it's 71-29. It's offensive to Trey Gowdy to say he was only 70. He was 71. And so anyhow, so I got tossed out of Congress, and a foundation came to me and said, Inglis, you're an unusual zoo animal, an actual conservative who says climate change is real. Will you speak and write for the proposition? And so I basically said, well, if the cage is nice and the food is good, yeah, I'll be your zoo animal. And the food is very good here, as I've already said, and the cage is wonderful. It's a wonderful place to be here in State College. And so So that's what I've been doing ever since. And by the way, just to make sure you're thinking, is he really a conservative? Must not be, because he couldn't be if he's talking about climate change. I'll give you some numbers. 93 American Conservative Union rating. I found out last night, Maddie arranged me to speak to the college Republicans and Libertarians. That's an A here at Penn State. It's a low A, but it's still an A, right? 93. 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action, that's a liberal group, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO, a labor union. I was really shooting for a 0. I once asked for a recount on that vote. Well, in front of a big audience in Washington, I said, I want a recount on that. I didn't know it, but one of the organizers was sitting there when this guy from the AFL-CIO gets up and walks over to her and hands her his card and leaves right after I'd said that about I want a recount. And she was really nervous, but she turned the card over and he'd written, "Tell Inglis I'll buy him drinks sometime. We'll talk about the recount." So anyhow, so we haven't yet gotten that kind of down to lower. I'd run it lower than 23. Okay, so pretty conservative guy, right? That's the, so that's what I've been doing ever since, is at the invitation of that foundation, some others came along. We're basically trying to engage with conservatives. And so when we know that I've got the oar in the water is when I'm talking to conservatives. And so got a few conservatives here, and so got the oar in the water. The secondary purpose for us that I'm going to mostly be fulfilling here today is helping you to, equipping you as one of those Democrats to speak to Uncle Ed or Uncle Charlie coming for Easter or Passover. You know who I'm talking about. He's the reason that you don't want to bring it up at Easter or Passover or whatever festival you have coming up. Because you know it's going to get an awkward situation, right? So my secondary purpose, last night I had the oar in the water with conservatives. Today I'll be speaking to people who I'm helping you to learn the language of conservatism. And here's the difference. It is a big language difference. Progressives really do generally address climate change in terms of questioning the capitalistic system and corporations are villains, they're the bad guys. The problem when you use that language on the right is that's not what conservatives believe. Conservatives are content with a capitalistic system, and they definitely don't agree with you that corporations are evil, because corporations are people too, is what we say. You know what I'm talking about. That's what we conservatives believe. And so, what are you going to do here? If you want to reach Charlie or Ed coming, Uncle Ed coming for dinner, is you got to somehow figure out a way to get inside his language. And so we talk about more energy, more mobility, and more freedom, not less. We talk about an exciting energy revolution that's going to transform our lives and transform the lives of dark places in this world that are currently festering with terrorist thoughts and scheming, and connect those people to the world through distributed energy systems that power their lives with better batteries and probably better solar efficiency, invented here at Penn State and other places, commercialized by those corporate interests, and then we're going to make money selling them those systems and serving our customer. It's a completely different view than that. Language is different than the language of do with less and repent. And you know, it's considerable that, you know, it's basically, I know that this is not what the left ever says, but it's sort of like walk and eat bugs is what it sounds like, right? Do with less, sit in sackcloth and ashes. This is not attractive to conservatives. And so what we go around doing is trying to persuade conservatives to enter the competition of ideas and to figure out a way to do this with a small government. We have an ad that says, what is it? It's join us in solving climate change before big government gets it wrong. And so it's like, enter the competition of ideas, conservatives. Otherwise, what's going to happen is when the country decides it has a need, it'll take something over nothing. And it'll take that big government solution when it decides it's got a problem. If Denver burns down because of a wildfire, we're going to have a big government solution if we don't have in place the competitive free enterprise solution. And that solution I just described for you here is one that, frankly, is hard to communicate, because smart is hard and easy is dumb, or dumb is real easy. So smart is hard, but dumb is real easy, right? And so the question is whether we can do something, a really hard and smart policy, like a carbon tax. Now, how in the world can you get that done? A carbon tax? Well, we think that the way to do it is to make sure it's two things. One is revenue neutral and the other is border adjustable. So the thing to emphasize to Uncle Ed is what we're trying to do here, Uncle Ed, is simply internalize negative externalities. Now, of course, you'll have to unpack that if Ed didn't major in economics. And you have to explain to him what we're really just talking about is simple accountability. We're talking about putting all the cost in on all the fuels and eliminating all the subsidies. And we mean all the subsidies. We are high-octane conservative messengers on this. We say that Dr. Friedman, you're supposed to bow at the mention of his name if you're a conservative, would have wanted to eliminate all subsidies. We had an event one time at the University of Chicago called What Would Milton Friedman Do About Climate Change? And by the way, his son got in touch and said it was a posthumous conscription of his father. We decided to leave that alone. But apparently he's not a climate change activist. The son isn't. But we had the Milton Friedman, chair of the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago, telling the whole world in that event that, of course, Milton Friedman would say, simply internalize negative externalities. Make it so all the costs are in on all the fuels, so that in a transparent, accountable marketplace, consumers, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, notice all these libertarian terms here and these right-wing terms, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, can pursue their self-interest, seeing the full cost. Because right now, as I was telling the college Republicans, college libertarians last night, if I'm Inglis Industries, Inglis coal-fired electricity, I get away with socializing my soot. It's a great deal for me. Stinks for my neighbors. But I am unaccountable for these small particulates that I put in the air. Stinks for everybody else. Great for me. And we conservatives don't like to socialize anything, not medicine, not soot even. We don't want to socialize anything. And so you got to make me accountable. And one way to do that is an upstream application of a revenue neutral border adjustable carbon tax. And now this is going to take some unpacking, right? Because now you're talking to Charlie or Ed at the dinner table, and this is getting pretty heavy, right? We're talking internalizing negative externalities, and we just threw out two big terms that sound economist-like, revenue neutral and border adjustable. Revenue neutral means we're going to cut taxes somewhere else. If we're going to put on this new carbon tax, we're going to cut your taxes somewhere else. Great question last night from one of the conservative students was, isn't a carbon tax regressive? Answer, it is, by itself. It is regressive. If you put on a carbon tax by itself, it hurts poor people more than it punishes wealthy people. Unless you, in the recycling of the revenue, do some things like cut payroll taxes or dividend the money back, in which case you overcome the regressivity. In fact, if you do the payroll tax option, Congressional Budget Office says the bottom 70 percentile do better than they're doing under the current system because they get more of a paycheck because their FICA tax goes down. So you try to tell Charlie about we want to internalize negative externalities, right? We want Inglis industries, Inglis coal-fired electricity to be fully accountable. And we want to pair that tax with a dollar for dollar reduction in other taxes so there's no growth of government. Charlie, we are not growing government. And it's so important, as I was saying to breakfast this morning with my CCL friends, is it's so important that they are reaching to the right at CCL, trying to help people to understand that if you come to that position, you can get conservatives on board. We're not talking about growing the government. And then the second thing is make it border adjustable. That means that you apply the tax on entry into the United States as though the good were made here in the United States. China challenges that in the World Trade Organization, saying that's an impermissible tariff. We think they lose based on precedents in the chemical industry that say you can have content taxes based on the content of the stuff coming in. You can apply a tax. So this would be a content tax. Sheet of flat steel is coming through the Port of Philadelphia right now. We know based on American equivalent of products how much CO2 is emitted in the production of that steel. Ladies and gentlemen of the WTO, that's an immediate grant and gift to the Chinese because we know we're more energy efficient than they are. So therefore, if we're just basing on American equivalents, we're obviously not trying to be trade punitive because we just cut them a big break. We used American equivalents because there's no way we can administratively audit their energy inputs into that sheet of flat steel. But we just applied a tax. China challenges, says that's impermissible. We win, we think, and it's not a slam dunk, I'll tell you. I'm not here to tell you, it's an easy case in the WTO, but if you do make it based on American equivalents, you increase the chances of winning in the WTO on that. If you do, and if we do win the case, what does China do? Well, we think within 24 hours, because they have an amazing way of reaching consensus in China, they will have the same price on carbon dioxide, right? Because otherwise, that sheet of flat steel that's coming through Philadelphia is generating a tax that is being remitted to Washington that could have been collected in China, in which case it would have been remitted to Beijing. 24 hours later, they got the same price on carbon dioxide. And then the whole world follows, because if you're doing business anywhere in the world, you're doing business with America and China. Now the whole world is in on this internalization of negative externalities. And you've got 7 billion people, not just 325 plus million people, demanding innovation, saying to the entrepreneur and the inventor, give me the better solar cell, the better battery. The market becomes the prize. 7 billion people wanting your products. Stuff comes out of the lab, becomes economic, and then you have innovation happening. Now, what you just heard, that sounds like an awful lot of faith in free enterprise, doesn't it? I mean, but I'm here to tell you that I think it is a reasonable faith, and the proof of that is in your hands. Richard Alley was here earlier, and he got me all pepped up about this to use this example because it is so true. Is that phone, has more computing capacity than what we landed on the moon with. And in the mid-'80s, McKinsey was asked by AT&T to tell them how many cell phones would be in service at the year Y2K, because AT&T was considering going into the business. McKinsey thought and thought, came back with the answer, 800,000. Well, the only problem with McKinsey was there were 800,000 cell phones going into service every 3 days as Y2K rolled around. So I don't know how many orders of magnitude that is that they were off, but it was big. Now, in fairness to McKinsey, my first cell phone was a bag phone. Anybody here old enough to remember a bag phone? We got some people. It was in a bag. I know I'm talking to students and say, what are you talking about? No, it's in a bag. It's like a satchel you carried around. And it had a cord on it, and you picked it up and you talked on it. And it was $1 a minute. In the district that I was running in, there were 3 counties. It didn't work in one of them. The battery didn't last. You had to leave it plugged into the cigarette lighter. So no wonder McKinsey thought 800,000, who would want one of those things? But what happened? DARPA had created the technology. That was the government starting this thing. It came out of research, right, at fine universities, created the research. DARPA drove it along, and then it was commercialized. And the price came down and down and down to the place where a lot of us can afford them. I'm here to predict that the same thing's going to happen in energy. A little bit different, though, because the electrons we're getting right now, we've already got electrons, so it's not like it's a new kind of thing. A smartphone was a new kind of thing. But, so it won't be quite as revolutionary as the tech revolution, but the way that we make electricity can change completely from the way we're doing it now. And what an exciting thing that is. And so it's not about doom and gloom. If you're a conservative and a capitalist, this is an incredible opportunity, Charlie, or Ed, Uncle Ed. It's an incredible opportunity for growth in the American economy, because if we play our cards right, we're going to perfect those systems here, and we're going to sell them around the world. We're going to light up those dark places, and we're going to make it so that people have a better life. And we're going to make money in the capitalistic system by serving our customers. And it's a glorious thing. And so that way people can say, oh, so you're not just attacking my way of life. You're not telling me that I've got to give up everything that I've worked for. You're telling me that I can have this life, just have it better. And that really is, I think, the truth of the message, is that we can have this life and have it better. And I'm going to stop here and start answering your questions and hearing your comments, because I'm interested in your comments as well as your questions. But I might just cap this part of the presentation with this, is, none of us were around when they wrote the Constitution, that amazing document. None of the students were around, and I was too young when they marched in Selma. But you and I can be there when we solve climate change. It's an incredible calling, an incredible opportunity. The question is whether we can just bring America together and lead the world to a solution. And I might tell you, well, no, I'm going to tell you that later. Let me see what questions or comments you have about, and I'm interested in your comments as well as your questions, really. Let me switch this to obviously I'm going to ask you to stand with us here after a while, but before I do that, let me hear your questions or comments. Yes?
Within your context of bigger government, what kind of hurdles do you hear in terms of the administration of the carbon tax after you have those funds? In terms of, is there concerns that the money wouldn't be used effectively?
Yeah, that's, well, they're certainly the concern on the conservative side. The people that that we're really after as conservatives is who we're trying to speak to, because. There are people who can speak better to progressives than I can, right? But for conservatives, we've got to convince them that we're not trying to grow the government. It's very important. But I will tell you, there's a hurdle that we've got to get over that is really difficult, and it's one that all Americans face, which is they don't trust that the government would give them the money back. And so there's a failure of trust about, we just don't believe you when you say that it's going to be revenue neutral. It won't be revenue neutral. And the problem is they've got good evidence to back up that claim that it's not going to be revenue neutral, because you probably all drive across bridges that were told until the bridge is paid for. And the bridge has been paid for 20 years ago and you're still paying a toll. Education lottery in South Carolina was going to lift us all to nirvana. And what happened was the legislature cut funding for colleges and university, and so basically it ended up about a wash. Okay, so we've seen this movie before, and there's a lot of skepticism. So that's what we've got to overcome. Anybody got any suggestions about how to do that? I mean, it's really a hard nut to crack, is people do not believe it'd be revenue neutral. The only thing I can tell them is, well, if it's not in the four corners of the bill, don't vote for it. I mean, if it doesn't say, and hereby we are cutting taxes here, or we are dividending the money back here, don't vote for it. Anybody got any better way to say that? I mean, to convince our fellow citizens that we can govern ourselves. Yeah.
Isn't that any different from the Alaska situation with oil? The oil payment?
Tell me about what you mean.
Well, Alaska remits revenue back to its citizens every year in a check.
Yeah.
So how is that? I mean, there's a proven pass-through.
Yeah.
Money in, money out.
That's a good example of how
It's worked for how many years?
people should have faith based on that. Yeah, good. Yeah, it's a good example of how it has worked. What else you want to know? Questions or comments? Or, yeah. Yeah, here's the problem. Politicians are afraid of the people they represent, but they are terrified of the activists in their own party, because those activists are the ones that kill you in primaries. And so, you know, in my case, the other guy got 71% of the 18% of the electors who showed up. So I think that works out to 13%, doesn't it? Fired me. And so, so that's the problem. It's the activist. And so what happens is if you're a conservative, you slam yourself up on the right-hand wall. And you don't want any daylight between you and that wall. Because if you establish a daylight over there, somebody's going to run to your right. They can say, oh, he's a sellout. He's a squish. You know. And if you're on the left, same thing happens. You slam yourself up on this left-hand wall. Jerry Nadler is a friend from Congress. He's now the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Jerry once told me, he said, it is exhausting to represent my district, he told me. He said, it's the most liberal district in the country, and I got to wake up every morning trying to out-liberal them. He says, it is exhausting, right? Because he's got to be more liberal than everybody in the district. I mean, if you're going to lead them, you got to be more than them. And so the result is that, to tell you the truth, people from those kind of districts are pretty much useless to governing the country, because those districts don't represent most of the people. And so somehow, I'm stating things that are just stating the problem. I'm diagnosing the problem. I'm not giving you a treatment here for how you get people off of that wall. Except that what we're trying to do is fill in that space. If G.T. Thompson would move off of that wall over there, then we will come over there and say, we got some people, we'll be able to identify people. I'll get to that in a moment. We'll be able to show you, G.T., some people in your district who will back you up, who will have your back on talk radio, on the editorial pages of the paper, at town hall meetings, who will stand up and say, I'm with Milton Friedman, fix this thing. It's conservative to care about climate change. Then GT can come off that wall a little bit, right? Otherwise, he's got to be over there. And so that's our role, is getting some people to populate that space, essentially move the wall in, if you will. This is a movable wall over here. Maybe I should use this one. From your perspective, this is the right, and that wall moves. And so we need to move the wall in a little bit. Yeah, Peter.
So it seems like, I mean, there are two problems that I think we have in the country that make action on this. There are two other problems that we have in the country that make talking about climate change more difficult, and I hope that you'll comment on those.
Yeah.
Campaign finance reform and gerrymandering.
Yeah. Yeah, by the way, Barbara Spencer right there, who's a supervisor from Half Moon Township, we were just talking about the politics of all of this. And so this is all, so you're hitting on two important things. One is campaign finance reform and the other is gerrymandering. Okay, so when you're talking with Uncle Ed, you're likely to say, if you're a progressive, that that's all the problem is campaign finance problem. And Ed doesn't believe that. And frankly, I don't believe it either. I think it is part of the problem, it's not all the problem. And we were talking about this last night, about how the Koch brothers saw an opportunity in the high tide of discontent that came in the Great Recession. And they decided, what a great time to run an ad campaign about climate change and climate change disputation, because they got a wave going on a very high tide of discontent. And they came over that seawall and they shorted out all the climate change action equipment. And we've been bailing ever since. That's really the history of climate change. We were getting close in '08. Remember, at the beginning of '08, Newt Gingrich is on the couch with Nancy Pelosi in an ad. We don't agree on much, do we, Newt? No, Nancy, but we agree that climate change is real and let's do something about it. By the end of '08, Newt had switched to the opposite position. Newt's a very agile fellow. In his personal life as well as his political views. I mean, you know, he's agile. And so the intervening event was the wheels coming off the financial system in October of '08. So Newt switched. So we were going fine. There was consensus, it was movement. And then there's this incredible opportunity that was handed to some people because a secret Muslim, non-American socialist got elected to the White House. By the way, it's none of those things, but it's an incredible opportunity. And the people took the opportunity at hand. And they said, he's a secret Muslim, he's a socialist, he's a non-American, and he's got climate change, and you can see how that's driving. So now, Peter, it's into the corporate interest there, right? And there's money behind it. But here's the thing, here's why I don't say that campaign finance reform is all of that. I mean, it could help, surely it would help. I don't know the answer to that, by the way. I don't know, I cannot stand here and tell you how to fix campaign finance. I got some ideas, but I'm not sure they'd really solve all the problem. But here's the thing, the reason I'm saying it's not the all of it is, if there had not been that high tide of discontent, the Koch brothers would not have been successful in coming across that seawall. And the example I often give is, in the 1970s, if you were running for Congress in, say, South Carolina or Georgia, one of the best ways to win a Democratic primary, because back then it was all in the Democratic primary, there was no such thing as a Republican Party in the South, what you would have run on is, by golly, we're standing with Taiwan, and we're going to stop those Reds. And you could have won a Democratic primary in the 70s, making that your number one issue. I would say to you, if you're planning on running for Congress in 2020, Taiwan is not an issue. In fact, it is dead low tide on Taiwan, okay? And don't run in any kind of primary saying that is my number one issue. Because there's no amount of money from anybody who owns Taiwan and could give you all the money that would give you enough money to come over the seawall, right? It's just not. And so, so I'm sort of, it's a part of the explanation, it's not the whole explanation. Still important to pursue campaign finance reform. And then the gerrymandering thing is the same. I think there's some exciting ideas, particularly California Citizens Commission and those kinds of things. Maybe even some ranked choice voting, I think, is interesting. If anybody related by blood or marriage to Ted Cruz here? Okay, then I'll go on. Except it's probably being taped, so anyway, but who cares? I'm sure he doesn't like me, and what I was about to say is ranked choice voting would mean that a guy like Ted Cruz would never get elected, right? Because even Ted's mother doesn't like him, all right? And so, you know, it's like, his mother would vote for him like the last one on the list. And so it forces people into a ranked choicing that, anyway, so there's some ideas like that that might change what we've got, which is Jerry Nadler on this wall and GT on that wall. And I'm not sure GT is totally on that wall. I know Jerry tells me that he's on this wall. And he's got to be on this wall. He tells me that. I know that from Jerry himself. And so, anyway, so you've raised two important things that are outside the purview of our operation, I guess, but I have thoughts, but I can't tell you how to fix campaign finance and gerrymandering. Maybe when we're successful after this, we're going to disband Republican. We'll go into that. Actually, what I want to go into is the Australian system of compulsory voting, so that you have to vote. Now, if I get the impossible thing done that I'm trying to get done, I will move on to that next impossibility, because the thing is, if everybody has, in Australia, you got to register when you're 18. If you don't show up to vote, you get a ticket for about $50 in the mail that you've got to pay. And so what it means is that everybody's showing up to vote. And so there is no need to go over here and say crazy things to people on the left. In fact, you hurt yourself if you say crazy things, because most people aren't crazy. And if you say crazy things on the right, you're hurting yourself. So it forces more median policy preference. The problem is it would require a constitutional amendment and all kinds of other things, and it's never going to happen, all right? But we can dream, can't we? I mean, it'd be a pretty cool thing. What other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Can you see your solution kind of working in the short term with our current administration?
Yeah, the question is about timing, when we see this happening. Here's our, I think I shocked my CCL friends this morning by telling them, here's all we want out of the current Congress. Substantive hearings, cooperative hearings, and a dramatic increase in ARPA-E funding. That's it. Because we don't think there's any chance of meaningful climate legislation in this current Congress, and we shouldn't even try. Because to do so is to roll a rock over to the Senate, and there is no reason to roll a rock over there. So rather, what to do is have those constructive hearings where, just dream with me for a moment, that Democrats could be gracious enough to their Republican colleagues. Okay, can you dream with that with me? Let's envision that future of them being actually nice to Republicans, because the Republicans haven't been nice to them, and now the shoe's on the other foot. But if Democrats could just be nice enough to give them a little bit of room to come around on this. Don't rub their nose in it while they're turning, Don't say, yeah, you're a stupid one, the dumb kid in the class, the last one to get it, okay? Don't say that. Let them say, I didn't like the solution you were offering before. I didn't like cap and trade, and I didn't like the Clean Power Plan, but I could be for a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax. Let them say that, okay? That's what I'm talking about, constructive hearings. And they've already happened. And let me just give you the exciting news. If you haven't seen this, it's already happened. 2 weeks ago, House Energy and Commerce Committee, Republican headline in the press release, Republicans are focused on pragmatic solutions to climate change. Last week, Science Committee hearing, Frank Lucas, the new Republican ranking member, and others, he'd be chairman if Republicans were in control, says, obviously climate change is real, it's human caused, it's caused by emissions, and we need to do something about it. This is dramatic, a dramatic shift. And so it's happening. So in this Congress, just those constructive hearings show us we can do it by increasing ARPA-E funding, and then get ready for 2022. Because after the 2020 election, 2 years into the next administration, everybody's with, please, into the next administration, then we have a chance of meaningful climate action brought forward by both conservatives and progressives. And that's our dream. And so that's what we're looking for, is by 2022. So modest expectations out of this one, hope for the next Congress. Yeah.
Building on that idea, you're saying put it off a couple of years. And I love your analogy about Denver burning, right? Some would say that although Denver isn't literally burning, that we're already at that point, that it's too late in the game for a carbon fee and dividend to be adequate to stop us in this progression, and that a carbon tax is a great idea, but we also need some command and control. We also need some top-down efforts. So I guess I imagine you're going to say that you don't agree with that, but then how high does that carbon fee need to be to actually 2 years from now or later make a difference? Yeah. And secondly, if you could also address, does that argument about big government is coming if we don't do something now, does that resonate with your conservative colleagues, that's something that will motivate them to act?
Your second question is easy. It does, because, and in fact, there's some pressure being created by, the Green New Deal on those folks, and that we can use that pressure to get what I'd like to see, which is this revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax. That's a mouthful, isn't it? We got to come up with some better way to say that. But anyway, but on the first part, it's hard to find an economist who disagrees with the idea of internalizing negative externalities through an upstream application of a carbon tax. It's really hard to find an economist who doesn't buy that. I asked a very senior economist at Virginia Tech one time, I said, give me the name of somebody that would write against that proposition. And he's an economist, noted economist. And he thought for a while and he said, there aren't any. And he said, in fact, you can't be an economist if you're opposed to those concepts. He said, it'd be like being a scientist and not believing in the scientific method. He said, it just doesn't exist. You can't be one. You can't be an economist if you disagree with that. And so a whole bunch of economists have come forward to say this is the obvious way to solve it. But again, it does require a lot of faith in free enterprise. And I realize there are people like Naomi Klein who make a very fine living attacking the capitalistic system. I was with her one time at an event, and I would point out that Naomi is doing real well in this capitalistic system. She makes a fine living attacking it, because she was clearly living better than I'm living. And so I'm thinking, maybe I should just get in the business of attacking capitalism. You can make a lot of money that way. I think that, we got to give it a shot. If it doesn't work, and it's got to be a steadily rising carbon tax. This is the key. I want to make clear, if they were talking a modest carbon tax that doesn't go up, we would consider that an absolute failure at republicen.org. Okay, it cannot be a minimal carbon tax that doesn't move up. That doesn't work. It's got to be a substantial price on carbon dioxide that is rising steadily, so that it signals that you've got to get to a place of showing a declining carbon footprint in order to continue to attract capital out of those markets for your business. And this has already happened. There was a coal company, the name of which I can't remember at the moment, earlier this week, that announced that they are not going to exploit as much coal as they had planned, because the writing is on the wall for these people that they got to borrow money in order to do those more digs. Well, they're having trouble getting the money because the people with the money are saying, you can't show us a declining carbon footprint, and we assume a price on carbon dioxide is coming. So the smart money is already choking down some of this, but you put on a carbon tax, it chokes fast. But again, that's a lot of faith in the free enterprise system, but I think it's well-placed faith. I mean, I think we've seen this, it's the cell phone example again. I mean, when things happen to create new technologies and then the drive for profit takes over, innovation happens rapidly. And if it weren't for Steve Jobs and Bill Gates competing to drive those costs down, and if we'd stopped, this can get controversial because I realize the composition of the crowd, but think about this. If we had stopped Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and said, listen, we've got to have a universal basic computer, and you've got to provide that to us right here, right now, I don't think they could have driven down prices the way they did, right? It would have gotten clogged up. But we took a risk with them. We said, okay, Bill, you go on price, and Steve, well, you're going to make it slick looking, and we're going to all think it's so slick and sexy to have one of those things. And so, but they drove the prices down. But if you had stopped and said, no, we've got to have everybody covered with computers right here, right now, I don't know how you would have done that. I think that the penetration would have been slower. Again, the faith in the free enterprise system. And this is a split. I think we were discussing this morning at breakfast. This is a split in the Democratic Party right now, right? I mean, it's not just Republicans that have some hard challenges ahead. The Democratic Party, you got that question, is would you say to people, no, you've got to have a universal basic whatever, income or computer right here, right now, or do you believe that you give the free enterprise system time to deliver that? And I think people like Frank Pallone, chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, are probably in the camp of saying, no, we're going to give the free enterprise system time to do that. And I think, frankly, Nancy Pelosi is probably there too. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is probably in the camp of no, guaranteed basic things right here, right now. And you've got to do that or else. And so there's a lot of conversations going to happen over here. Just consider the politics of that for a moment. If that's answered way left, it may just provide an incredible opportunity way right for re-election of various people on the way on that. So people over here, please choose carefully, because keep an eye on that thing coming back. Did I speak with enough cloaking there that it's not an IRS violation? I think so. So, what else you want to know? Questions or comments? Or yes, sir.
Hi. I want to set up the premise of my question was I myself is for like free market, capitalist, free enterprise. I'm for all of that. However, I'm greatly worried about the time frame of we're doing this thing.
Yeah.
Especially with the UN reporting that the point of no return is, we don't know, but it's pretty close.
Yeah.
So even with, you say cell phone, it goes very fast, but it still takes 10 years for proliferation of touchscreen. I don't think with the current energy composition with only 2% solar and all that stuff, to get to 50, get to 70, as someone said, it's probably going to take more than 10 years, and probably the point of no return is pretty close around there. So, so my question is, why can't it be something like a space race, but in this is case for a greener America? So we go all out and create tons of new jobs and huge innovation, like the space race, which we still benefits from now.
Yeah. Yeah, a couple things there, and in fact, I might, Mike or Dave, you want to mention something about that? Because I think you were talking about this last night, particularly it would be interesting to see what you say to that.
Yeah, I mean, we often talk about these specific thresholds, 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. These specific thresholds, 1.5 Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, as sort of points of no return, tipping points, and in reality, that's not really the way it works. If we miss the 1.5 degrees Celsius exit, we still want to go for the 2 degree exit. And if we miss that, we still go to the 2.5. And things get steadily worse the more we go down that highway. And so we're trying to get off at the earliest exit. Now, the problem is that you have individuals who frame this as sort of an all or nothing challenge, and if we miss that exit, and that's where the 12-year number comes. We've got to decrease emissions by about 10% a year for the next 12 years if we're going to avoid committing to more than 2 degrees Celsius warming of the planet. That framing is problematic because that just isn't the way it works. Things get steadily worse, and the converse of that is true. For every bit of carbon that we don't burn, things are going to be a little better. Dave might have some additional thoughts.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with Mike there. And, since we're speaking frankly, I think the IPCC 1.5 report, especially how it's being interpreted, it's kind of come across as this 1.5 or we're all going to die, in 12 years. I mean, that's, you listen to AOC, that's basically what she's talking about. If you actually go to the report, and I'm sure a lot of people in here have really gone through the report, draw a line on the risk. Remember, there's those bars of risk colors. Draw a line on 1.5 and draw a line on 2. 2 is worse, but it's not like 1.5 is great. We should have stopped at 0.5, honestly, or 1, or 1.5. I talk about going down a hill. Like we're living in Pennsylvania. You see the big hills with a truck speed of 20 miles an hour. 20 miles an hour is safe. Well, what if you do 25? Yeah, you're probably okay. 30? Okay. 70? No, you're going to die. So it's this gradation, as Mike points out. And, I think, while Bob's talking about free enterprise, is people say, well, now we got to have this command economy. Can the government pull this off? If free enterprise can't, can the government? I would remind people that the last time we had a Democratic administration, the government was unable to build a website for their president's highest domestic priority. So the competence isn't all there either.
Yeah, So it does, again, require a fair amount of faith in free enterprise, but really it's pretty well placed, don't you think? I mean, who would have, I remember walking in my law firm one day, and this tech guy who's a part-time receptionist at the desk said something about a search engine. I said, what's that? And he said, well, it's this thing called Google. And I said, what's Google? And it's sort of like the conversation I had one time in 1900, I think it was like 95 or 6. Guy asked me in the Charlotte airport, what's your email address? And I was so proud because I'd just gotten it on my card. So I pulled out my card and I handed it to him. He said, that's a website. And I said, what's the difference? Now, I'm not so stupid. It's just that 1995, 96, nobody knew the difference between a website and an email address. Can you believe it? It happened that fast. And so this energy thing can happen that fast, particularly if we use the power of the free enterprise system. I got to believe that's what it's going to be, right? But if you try to design it from Washington, I think Dave is onto something, even though that probably hurts some feelings about the healthcare thing, but still, it's a reality, isn't it? I mean, can you imagine trying to set that up from Washington? I mean, no, what you need is some people here at Penn State working on a battery that's different than the one they're working on in some lab at Stanford. And then somebody gets a breakthrough. Kleiner Perkins is investing right now in some sodium batteries, right? They might be winners if they did Google before and some things like that. They're pretty winning people. Their deal might win. If it does, it could change the world. And so I think that, but again, that's a lot of faith in free enterprise. You all are probably getting ready to leave, aren't you? And I'm supposed to leave here pretty soon.
Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up there. Bob has a flight to catch in about an hour and a half.
Yeah, but before you call quits, so let me just show you one other thing, okay? Is if you are one of those conservatives, if you know a conservative, if you love a conservative, please please stand with us. All you got to do is go to republican.org/join, and that's the form. It's very short. That's it. And again, what we're trying to do is make it so that GT sees that person exists. Right now, he doesn't think that's a thing. A conservative who cares about climate. If we show him that person, lots of them, we think, if you want to know, I'm going to be an inside baseball here, we think it's 200 active people in that district give enough space between him and the wall. to get out here in Solutionville. So it's just 200 people. It's a very doable objective. Just 200 Republicans. Now, they can't be progressives. They don't fill the gap because progressives are over here. And GT knows that his risk is not over here, it's over there. And so he's got to have people, that 200 people standing with him on that wall, calling talk radio saying, okay, the last caller who said that he's a nut because he's talking about fixing climate change, they're wrong. And here's why. It's conservative to act on climate change. And then give them the high-octane conservative stuff. Give you an example of how that works. I was once on a talk radio show in Houston. Talk radio host says, next up, a conservative who says climate change is real. And he laughs in the microphone and goes to the commercial break. Comes back with me live. And so I'm talking fast. The next day, and extended. He gave me like way long time on talk radio. The next day, the station called and said, we got a show today in Dallas, because they do the next day in Dallas. Will you be on? Show started this way. That same talk show host saying to me, how would that carbon tax work? He'd completely changed, because the day before, what he expected to hear was language from over here. Oh, you got to walk and eat bugs. You got to do with less. You got to be responsible. Kill all the corporations. Capitalistic system sucks. Whatever, all those things, right? No. What he heard was, by golly, internalize negative externalities and eliminate all the subsidies for all the fuels. No more electric car credits. No more production tax credit for wind. No more investment tax credit for solar. No more under-market leases on public land for the extraction of minerals. No more the biggest subsidy of them all, which is dumping into the trash dump of the sky without paying a tipping fee. And so he heard high-octane conservatism, and he, the next day, was thinking, okay. So that's what we need, is people to stand with us. And by the way, if it sounds familiar, what I'm talking about, this solution of a revenue-neutral, border-adjustable carbon tax, and you're a progressive, and you're going out of here thinking, he's talking high-octane conservative, but I swanny, I've heard this idea before. Well, it may be because it's the same thing that Al Gore has been for about 30 years. Al Gore's always been for revenue neutrality and a carbon tax. That's what he's always been for. And so now, I don't go out of my way at some conservative audiences to tell them that, all right? Because, but I want to tell you that so that you can share the beliefs that we could actually bring America together and solve this problem. Because the last thing I'll tell you, the one thing that encouraged me is I heard that Art Laffer, one of Ronald Reagan's economics advisors, had been over to Al Gore's house. They're neighbors in Nashville, Tennessee. Art Laffer, of course, of the Laffer curve, and so they talked it through, and they came to the conclusion that the prescription that I've described for you here today works for both of them. Art, because he desperately wants to untax income. He says, tax anything else. It's a no-brainer. And Al, because he desperately wants to reduce emissions. And so if you can bring Al Gore and Art Laffer together, surely we can bring America together and lead the world to a solution. That's our ultimate objective, even though we're quite branded in these red colors. The idea is ultimately you bring America together and you solve this thing. And so thank you for the opportunity to be with you.